In the Lyman direction, the Signum Unmanned Systems unit destroyed at least 6 vehicles belonging to the Russian occupiers. The enemy, under the cover of night, hoped their movements would go unnoticed. However, Ukrainian FPV drones see everything perfectly and successfully hit targets even at night. Also in the Lyman direction, the Russian army attacked near the settlements of Novomykhailivka, Karpivka, Shandryholov, and Redkadub. In the Pokrovsk direction, since the beginning of the day, Russian occupiers have been trying to push back the Ukrainian armed forces in the areas of Shakov, Fedorivka, Novoekonomik, Myrolubivka, Kotline, Udakny, and towards Myrnorad in Pokrovsk. In the Novopavlivka direction, the enemy attempted attacks in the areas of Yalta, Voskresenka, and Kamishivka.
There was a so-called strategic regrouping of troops, which actually determined, those DD directions where the enemy would attack most intensively. And today, they are carrying out these actions. This is the Pokrovsk direction, and, accordingly, the Novopavlivka direction, which are even competing for the top spot, so to speak, as to which direction will be the main one. But in any case, both of these directions are not connected to the Donetsk region, because Novopavlivka is already on the southern borders of Donetsk. It's clear that the enemy is trying, through the southern flank, to enter the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region and attempt to bypass Pokrovsk in order to start urban fighting there.
And in the Kramatorsk direction, the fighters of the 5th Assault Kiev Brigade are already destroying enemy shelters and fortifications along with the infantry stationed there. Reconnaissance drones closely monitor the movements of the Russians, identifying the locations of their shelters, after which FPV drones get to work, flying directly into their dugouts and bunkers. FPV drone operators from the 77th Separate Airmobile Brigade of the Air Assault Forces struck a multiple launch rocket system belonging to the Russian occupiers. As a result of the drone's precise hit on the BM-21 Grad launch rails, the entire ammunition load detonated and the system was destroyed. In addition, pilots from the same unit destroyed a Russian Army ammunition depot, a radar station, equipment, and eliminated 7 enemy soldiers.
It's a good system, so to speak, especially the drones. We're taking them out in swarms. We've moved to a model where a swarm of drones advances. It strikes various targets or troops, and the enemy can't shoot them all down, let alone identify every target at once. This is a good tactic, one we've been talking about for a long time. A drone swarm targets both troops and, so to speak, their reserves that they're sweating over.
Drone pilots from the Dobbush's Hornet unit are leaving Russian invaders not only without vehicles, but also without means of communication and surveillance. In one of the directions, they deprived the enemy of communications and reconnaissance, destroyed several pieces of equipment, and inflicted losses on enemy personnel. However, it's not just drones that are dealing blows to the Russians. Artillerymen from the 55th Brigade Zaporizhzhia Sich spotted a Russian army cannon in a forest belt and targeted it with artillery fire. The ammunition stockpile was hit, and as a result of its powerful detonation, the Russian cannon was put out of action. In the past 24 hours alone, Russia has lost another 780 soldiers in the war against Ukraine, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. As a result, the total losses of the Russian army have exceeded 1,084,000 personnel. In addition, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 1 Russian tank, 4 armored vehicles, 41 artillery systems, as well as 338 drones and more than 110 units of the occupiers' automotive and special equipment.
A military expert. Serhiy Maritovic, we're glad to see you. Welcome.
Good evening.
Welcome. Good evening.
You know, yesterday, when I was also sharing information, reading out the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, I caught myself thinking that, yes, well, really, it feels like deja vu because the directions remain the same as always, yes, for more than half a year now. There's Pokrovsk, which we talk about, and also the southern Slobozansk area. Yesterday, we actually mentioned Toretsk, but now I see there's no report specifically about Toretsk, though Lyman is mentioned. So, as I understand it, well, the enemy still continues, keeps trying, yes, trying to achieve what has been set as their main objectives. And, you know, I still want to ask you something. Obviously, in order to open new fronts and start carrying out certain tasks in new areas, the Russian military needs specific resources. But still, when things like this come up, some people call them scare tactics, others say there's a reasonable explanation for why these scare tactics appear. Still, today, if we broaden this topic a bit, Serhiy Maritovic, does the Russian army actually have the capability today to open, let's say, a new section of the front or a direction that hasn't previously been mentioned in the General Staff's reports?
You know, there's no such possibility. There's no such possibility. Why not? Because they can make plans. And I'm absolutely sure there are plans for crossing the Dnipro near Kherson for an offensive towards Zaporizhzhia, or, say, an attack towards Sumy or Kharkiv. But you have to understand the following. Besides these plans, there are also realities on the ground. That is, you have to understand that Ukraine is not just some passive observer of what might happen. Ukraine actually influences the situation. That's why we fully understand that any enemy movement, any at all, even down to a single soldier, as you're showing, is detected and recorded, and appropriate measures are taken accordingly. So they can wish and plan whatever they want. But we, including ourselves, are the ones dictating the situation on the front line and forcing the enemy to act within the limits of the resources they don't have. That is, you have to understand that yes, of course, the enemy has concentrated significant resources on certain sections of the front, which we have been repeating literally every day for quite a long time now. And now they've become a hostage to this situation, because any redeployment of resources to other sections of the front triggers an appropriate response from Ukraine's defense forces. There is information coming through certain channels that the enemy is transferring additional resources from the Kherson and Zaporizhia directions to the Novopavlivka or Torets directions. But, in general, we also respond accordingly to such actions, which prevents the enemy from opening up any new directions on new sections of the front.
Sergei Meridovic, tell me, if we're talking. Well, I don't know if we can, sum up right now. Can we call this, let's say, the results of this story called the Summer Offensive Operation? Although, I think we've talked about this with you on air before, that, in principle, these offensive operations never really stopped. Yeah, since that same spring, April, late May, they kept gradually, well, at least trying to ramp up that pressure. And now we're seeing certain things that, well, not exactly a lull, but even the official information from the general staff that we provided shows this. How many? 50? 78 combat clashes, right? When before, it used to be 150, sometimes even up to 200. What does that tell us? Sergei Meridovic, in your opinion, if we sum up this story called the Summer Offensive Operation, what kind of lull is this, really? Is it a moment of building up forces, or is it that even the human resources, which might seem inexhaustible for the Russian Federation, are, one way or another, being felt by the enemy?
That's quite a complicated question. That's quite a complicated question. And here's why. Because if we talk about the traditional trends in what is called an offensive operation, then, without a doubt, we are seeing a certain lull, meaning the enemy has exhausted or is close to exhausting the resources they have. And generally speaking, according to all the rules and canons of an offensive operation, they should take an operational pause to reorganize their forces, to regroup their troops, to bring up reserves, and to replenish resources. But here, we have a situation where, I would say, we're dealing with a kind of sinusoidal tactic. That is, the enemy, having set a task for themselves, continues to operate in certain areas as additional resources or reserves arrive. So, I can't say for sure right now that the enemy is exhausted and we can relax as well. That would be incorrect. Although, on the other hand, we are observing trends according to which, for example, in the April-May period you mentioned, we saw enemy offensive actions carried out by units of 30 to 60 people. But today, when we calculate or receive reports of combat engagements, we need to understand that a single engagement might involve just 2, maybe 4 enemy soldiers. What you're showing on the screen right now is basically also a type of combat engagement, and that's taken into account as well. Does this mean the enemy has completely exhausted its resources and won't launch further offensives? Not at all. Not at all. And as the enemy receives, even small reinforcements or resources, they still try to escalate the situation, which is why I called this a sinusoidal tactic. So, to say definitively that the summer offensive is over can only be done based on, let's say, strictly calendar terms. Because in fact, right now, we're already in autumn. But from the perspective of the soldiers and commanders on the front line, they're witnessing this wave-like tactic I mentioned, which has been ongoing for quite a long time now. And that's the essence of the current operations of the Russian forces. Fully aware that they can't achieve any quick, decisive operational result, they're doing everything possible just to maintain at least some level of pressure on the front line, knowing that our resources aren't limitless either, and hoping in this way to wear down our combat formations to the point where, as they say, the front line will collapse. We understand this perfectly well, and we're aware of the tough challenges faced by both the army and the Ukrainian state. And, in fact, we're actively countering such enemy actions, not allowing them to put their plans into practice.
Let me clarify, yes, 58 engagements, right? Although, in general, the order is clear, it seems we weren't really mistaken. Still, we understand that every battle, one way or another, is a challenge for the guys who are now defending our statehood. Sergei Meritovic, speaking about how it might be possible to change the situation on the battlefield, I'd like to, bring up a topic with you. Let's say, a story that, in turn, has been written about by many experts, and also by the former Commander-in-Chief Selesny. He said that, one way or another, major changes at the front could happen if we get, not some miracle weapon, but certain advantages over the enemy in terms of means that would allow us to strike legitimate targets, whether in areas that could be called the gray zone, in temporarily occupied territories, or even on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. Sergei Meritovic, what exactly could that be, in your opinion? And how do you see the prospects for this? Well, at least, let's put it this way. From time to time, we're shown things about missile drones and about those missiles capable of covering distances of thousands of kilometers.
I'll put it this way. Once again, this is a rather long-term, drawn-out prospect. Why? Because it's not just the presence of, let's call it conditionally, various types of Wunderwaffe that are qualitatively superior to the enemy. But the number of quantitative indicators also determines what we can call an advantage on the battlefield. Of course, we need to understand that we need volumes that are many times greater than the volumes we produce or receive today. AAA. And these volumes, we need to receive continuously over a long enough period of time in order to be able to, first, shield the battlefield. That is, to minimize our losses and maximize the enemy's losses by striking across the entire depth of their battle formations and the territory of the Russian Federation, wherever our strike assets can reach. But that's only the first stage of what is called a turning point in the situation. Second, AAA. No matter how much we put our faith in drones, these days we need to understand that you can't win a war with drones alone. Drones have turned out to be a unique defensive weapon, but it's unlikely they can help us or guarantee success on the battlefield if we need to conduct offensive operations. And we're saying that for Ukraine. It's critically important to receive a significant amount of aircraft because the axioms of any offensive campaign, and we're attacking a traditional army, yes, one that's been reinforced with some types of modern or copied weapons, like drones and electronic warfare systems, which haven't been used so widely before, require A. Air superiority, B. Superiority in firepower, and C. Superiority in maneuver. Moreover, without the first advantage, the third advantage is meaningless. So, that's why we need. It's absolutely critical for us to surpass, both in quantity and, most importantly, in quality. But quantity is a must. The enemy's air force grouping, or as they call it, the enemy's aerospace forces. We need to create a resource base that will allow us to deliver concentrated strikes, both along the front line and in the immediate rear. And again, this comes down to the quantity and quality of munitions. And we need to focus on acquiring additional volumes of equipment, without which any offensive makes no sense at all. Because an offensive advancing at a pace of less than 3 to 5 kilometers per day is suicide. So, at the very least, these are the three main directions. And you can calculate for yourself what resources are needed for this. And most importantly, the time. We need to develop these directions. But the most important thing, you see, is this. You can talk endlessly about some kind of weapon, but to me, that's like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. Let's be honest, wars are fought by people. Therefore, without increasing the number of personnel in the Ukrainian Defense Forces, it's impossible to talk about any kind of advantage. I'm not saying, nor am I calling for, and it's physically impossible anyway, that we will reach parity in troop numbers with the enemy. That's impossible, given our population. But when we talk about the need for additional manpower, no one has any doubts about that. And that's why it's important to understand that at the core, at the very foundation of everything I've mentioned, if you want to call it the base of this tetrahedron, are people. Without them, well, planes won't fly, tanks won't move, and, artillery won't fire. So these main, interconnected pillars, I would put it that way, can allow us to turn the tide at the front line. How and when we achieve this? Well, time will tell. A lot of it depends on us. It also depends, among other things, on our allies.
Sergei Meritovic, you mentioned, yes, the increase in our arsenal when it comes to aviation. Actually, I would say for about a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, this topic kind of faded away. Or rather, how should I put it? The topic continued, but after we got the F-16s, there was a lot less talk about getting, Gripens. And I see that for the past 2 days, this topic has been actively discussed. There's talk that Ukraine might once again reach out to its partners and allies to try to resolve the issue, so that the Gripens, those fierce northern griffins, could finally appear in the Ukrainian skies. Let's remind our viewers, because many have forgotten about them. We don't really talk about them much. We usually talk more about the F-16s, and sometimes the F-13s in the context of Turkey, but the Gripens rarely come up. If we're talking about the Gripens, how realistic is it that, first of all, what's your opinion? Will our allies, like Sweden, actually agree to provide this type of fighter aircraft? And also, right now, yes, because you and I have talked a lot about the F-16s, and the issue wasn't just about providing them, but also about training Ukrainian pilots and so on. If we're talking about the Gripens, even if, hypothetically, this issue is resolved for Ukraine, would there also need to be a long-term period for Ukrainian pilots to learn to operate this type of fighter?
I think they're already learning. I have a feeling about that. Let me share that feeling with you.
Very yes.
And, we need to understand the following. Both the Gripens and the Mirages and other types of aircraft are critically important for us. When I spoke about numerical superiority, it's important to note the following. The Russian Federation has proven to be phenomenally incapable of developing this particular indicator, specifically the coefficient of utilization of aerospace, or let's stick to the traditional term, Air Force capabilities. That's why the Gripens, Mirages, F-16s, and other planes and helicopters that will be supplied to us play a critical role. Because what did I put at the forefront? Quantity. So, as of today, you can ask not only me, but also artificial intelligence. I actually played around with this idea and was curious to see how much our thoughts align. Artificial intelligence also emphasizes that for Ukraine to gain an advantage, it needs to have at least 300 Western-made aircraft. At the very least. At one point, I made an estimate myself, somewhere in the range of 4 to 500. So, you see, we're not far off from that. That's why, as of today, it's really about increasing the numbers. What types of aircraft? Well, that's up to our command to decide. And how fast? It won't happen quickly. Because you have to understand that from a military standpoint, implementing and introducing any kind of weaponry is a logistical nightmare. Because it's not just about the skilled pilots, not just about the sophisticated planes. It's the entire intricate chain of essential maintenance, crucial repairs, vital supply logistics, precise navigation equipment, and so on and so forth. All of which are specifically and uniquely tailored to this particular type of aircraft. Why is it called a logistical nightmare? Plus, there's the necessary ground infrastructure, the appropriate buildings, the right hangars, and so on and so forth. And LT, break time equals 0.5s/and GT. Even the runways themselves have to meet certain specific requirements for each type of aircraft. So you can imagine just how massive this task really is. And what kind of planes are we talking about? Gripens, Mirages, Rafales, or even Kfurs, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that they have them.
I asked ChatGPT. I meant to say I asked Yassine.
Not to advertise or anything, right? Because there are others too,
At a minimum for defense. Well, this is what the chat says. You need 60 to 80 modern fighter jets like the F-16, Gripen, or similar. And for full control of the airspace, it's 150 to 200. Well, basically, 280 to 280. So, on average.
About 300. Well, there are different versions, but they say.
We probably also ask the question in different ways.
No, but the general idea is clear. We're not talking about dozens, right? But a couple hundred. Not even 100, but more than that.
You have to understand that I was coming from the fact that, unfortunately, there's such a thing as ongoing losses and their replacement. So I also took that nuance into account.
Thank you so much.
Sergei Mertovic, thank you. Thank you for joining our broadcast.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.